what I suppose...
What's your name?
Would be Jacob, by the way.
Jacob.
Yeah, nice to meet
Mansoor,
you.
nice meeting you too.
So, well, if you want to start, do you want to tell me kind of why I should believe in Islam, or would you like a sort of justification as to why I reject Islam along with every other faith? Sort of,
I mean, you go ahead and tell us about your conviction of, what drove you to your position.
Okay, so when you say conviction, I wouldn't say I'm 100% sure about anything. I'm not a subjectivist, but I still, other than... Oh, okay. Oh my God.
Someone stop it for God's sake.
And the police are they just watching? Two adults behaving like children.
Yeah. Sorry. Are you going to edit the bits with the... all right. So,
Well, that doesn't happen routinely in the park.
Yeah.
But it seems to be sometimes these things get escalated.
So, so I guess I would say I don't think you can be sort of 100% sure when you make claims regarding the supernatural, when you make claims about God, which is why I wouldn't say, I 100% know that there is no God, but I'm sort of suspicious of people who make claims of absolute certainty unless it's regarding mathematical truths. I mean, if you say that you're certain 2 + 2 = 4, that's a pretty solid, I wouldn't dispute that. But insofar as God or Allah is concerned, I sort of I haven't really seen any real strong argument. So I don't know if you want to begin with a sort of...
What's the difference between arguments and evidence?
So, well,
in your understanding?
In my understanding, an argument would be a proposition of sorts, which is supported by evidence, which would be what can be observed in reality, in the physical world.
Sure. So arguments can be supported or unsupported by evidence. So basically evidence is something which we should be looking for rather than arguments themselves, because arguments can have counter-arguments, and it could go into even the areas of rhetoric. Whoever is a bit more in rhetoric and they're eloquent, it may whitewash or smoke screen the whole issue. So evidence is what counts.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you make arguments based on the evidence, but
yes, or you can make arguments neglecting the evidence.
Sure.
And that was, sure. So evidence is very important.
Of course.
Sure. So in terms of this reality, does the reality exist? Is this something that we say we have evidence for?
Yes.
Without making this is only an argument.
So what, the statement reality exists?
That we are real and the reality around us exists. Is this something that requires an argument, or is this something that's self-evident?
I would say an objectivist would say existence is self-evident. Certainly mine is, to me, as Descartes says, cogito ergo sum. The fact that I'm able to ask that question means certainly that I exist. So I'd say 100% sure that I exist, 99.9% sure that you exist, talking to me.
Yeah, so at least you exist.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you come into existence if there were no cause to bring you into existence? Do you somehow accept that you can exist without any prior cause of your existence?
Well, I would regard my parents as being my direct cause.
And you go back as much as you can go?
Okay, right. So, yes, I would say I would say I'm satisfied with my own existence without some divine creator. Without any God having made me in the beginning. I think it's reasonable. Sorry. Go on.
So you're agreeing that you exist.
Yes.
And if the question is asked, how do you exist without something or someone bringing you into existence? Two possibilities. Existence like yourself, or things prior to yourself, could be rearrangement of matter. I mean, it could be just a rearrangement of matter.
Essentially, yes.
So are you proposing that matter essentially is eternally existent without any prior beginning? Or,
not necessarily.
or all of these things which we call reality had a beginning of existence which required a cause which brought it into existence?
I would go a bit radical and say neither of those. So Immanuel Kant said he identified that they were the two options that you could have. Either, never mind me, but say existence, say the universe. Either the universe is eternal and has always existed and gone back in time. I don't say that because that seems sort of unlikely, but he says the other option is that the universe began to exist to the point that we might call the Big Bang. But he says that that's equally absurd, because if that is true, then there was an infinite time before even the universe began. And so he says how both of these are equally absurd and we can't know which is true. But if you look at recent developments in cosmology, and if you read Stephen Hawking's books on various sort of essays on time, in a brief history of time, he talks about a third option which solves the problem of a sort of eternity, which is that space-time can be finite but exist in a sort of no boundary condition. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that more. Or if you want to, so he says essentially we're still looking for a kind of unified theory of both quantum mechanics and also the theory of gravity, because so far gravity and the quantum field of physical study have been quite hard to reconcile. But he says that although we haven't got a unified quantum theory of gravity just at the moment, he says we can be sure of some elements which that theory has to have. And he says one of them is Richard Feynman's proposal for a sum of histories of particles, and he says the other one has to be Einstein's idea of a sort of curved space-time. And when you bring those two together, which cosmologists, Feynman and Hawking and people he's written books with are pretty sure about, it would look like a curved Euclidean, which means four-dimensional space-time, in which there is no distinction between space and time, exist. And he says, and if you apply that, then and if you use you add the numbers up in imaginary time, you are able to get a sort of space-time which is not infinite. It is finite, but it's in the same way that the Earth doesn't really have a boundary. The Earth is finite, but there's no boundary. If you're going around the globe, you will just keep going round. So it's a very difficult concept to understand, and I appreciate I can't really do it justice here.
May I ask a question? Can I ask a question? I'm kind of agnostic. I'm not really sure whether there's God or not. Sure. But I do find what they call the Kalam cosmological argument quite reasonable.
So which Kalam cosmological argument? Is
okay. Well, let me give my.
Is it William Lane Craig's?
No. Let me just give my understanding, simplistic understanding. I mean, basically the idea that everything has a cause, as far as we know. And if you keep taking that cause back, you'll just go on ad infinitum, and therefore it seems reasonable to
leave it there, yeah?
speculate that there may be a supernatural force that started it.
Yeah, you can speculate that.
Call it God if you want.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not closed to the possibility.
I'm not saying that is true, but I'm not denying it. I mean, it seems to be a reasonable
possibility.
Theory.
I'm not denying that it's 0% likely. I'm saying it just seems to be. Do you mind if I get my notes out on Kalam? I've got the Kalam document here.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Please.
Is that all right? Interrupt me if any time.
No. Just carry on.
So I've got the Kalam here. So premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Number two, the universe began to exist. Conclusion is the universe has a cause. So I've got several problems with this argument, because for one, you can't really say that everything that begins to exist does have a cause, because we don't know that, because really the only thing that you could say has begun to exist would be the universe itself. So you're really only saying, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. So it's not really...
But there's a causational series of events, isn't there?
Yes.
From that...
Well, yes there is, but... Okay, so the way to solve that, either you have the sort of infinite, the eternal universe, which I don't believe in, by the way, because I think it could be a possibility, but I don't really sort of see it. But I think that if you've got this model of Euclidean curved space-time, that sort of solves your problem of having an infinite regress, because the theory of gravity itself predicts that its own predictions break down at the quantum level and thus at the Big Bang, and so we would sort of cease to know how time. Basically, prior to the Big Bang, any any occurrences before the Big Bang would essentially be meaningless, and you wouldn't be able to predict what came after the Big Bang because there was such a breakdown of the theory of relativity. That's not a great way to explain it. Can I give you my sort of reverse cosmological argument? So I have to confess this is not mine. But so premise one: nothing which exists can cause something non-existent to begin existing. So I can't, me who exists, I can't just bring in a rabbit from a hat into the world unless it's, you know...
Can you repeat that again?
Start with something.
Yeah. So
repeat that again.
Nothing which exists, such as me, can cause something non-existent to begin existing.
Yes, but that's something that exists in this physical material world.
Sorry?
That's something that exists in this physical material world.
What, the
about
rabbit?
Yes, what about something that exists outside of this world?
Well, can you bring something in from outside the world into this world?
Not within the parameters of the physical world as we know.
But in the cosmos, you're saying it's possible.
Perhaps outside of the cosmos. But on another deeper level, with what you've said, do you agree that the universe has got consciousness?
Has got consciousness. I had this discussion with Sid a couple of weeks ago. Does the universe have consciousness?
Yes.
Insofar as we have consciousness and we're part of the universe, yes. Insofar as, unconscious objects, no, of course they don't have consciousness. By definition, the fence does not have consciousness. And that's part of the universe as well. So, does consciousness exist in the universe? Yes. But
And what do you think is the source of consciousness?
what is the source of consciousness? I don't know.
But don't you think it's a very important question?
It is an important question, but I don't think you're any more justified in saying that it's God than I think it's quite reasonable to say we're not too sure. I think you could certainly say consciousness is an emergent property. I mean, we know that living organisms were originated from non-living organisms. Even if you reject that the Miller-Urey experiment proved that it happened on Earth, we still know that abiogenesis is possible. And so I think from single-celled organisms, that's a reasonable explanation as to how beings can become, from unicellular to multicellular, and thus become more complicated, more evolved, and thus be more conscious. I'm sorry, this was meant to be a discussion.
No.
Sorry, we've silenced it.
It's good. It's quite good that we're having
Yeah.
a discussion so we can have our input. Carry on. What do you have to say?
Sorry. So what would be your response?
Because
to
I think, when you're looking at your model of the universe, and I've only just walked in the last minute.
Yeah, of
so
course.
my guess is you're somebody who's either an agnostic or somebody who's not ultra-religious, obviously.
I'm not altruist.
No, you're obviously not religious.
Oh, I'm not religious. No.
So
Yes.
the thrust of your argument was physicality, and you're basically arguing against the existence of the God.
Yes.
And the comeback, there are all sorts of arguments that people can throw at you.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the one that I think is the most difficult for you to hurdle over is consciousness. It's the fact
Okay,
that
right.
you and I are conscious. Because,
yeah.
like, if the universe just existed as it is, that's quite amazing. But if the universe exists with consciousness, that's even more extraordinary.
It is. Yeah.
What is consciousness exactly? I mean, I'm not trying to be funny. I mean,
No, it's a
I
great
actually
question.
genuinely want to know what
That's a
exactly.
spectacular question. I agree. It's not so easy to define. So we think about. I could throw it back at you and say, who's asked the question? Right? Who has actually asked that question?
Me.
And who are you when you say me? Is it your mind, or is there something else there?
My mind, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether you've read any of Yuval Harari's books.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
I think he talked about consciousness briefly, and he was saying that, I mean, there are various views, and one of the views is that it's just a lot of neurons firing off and giving this, if you like, an illusion of something,
I'm not inclined to subscribe to that thesis.
Sorry?
I'm not inclined to agree with Yuval Harari. But
I'm
you
not
put
saying
it
I
down-
agree
And
either.
I imagine you're very much on the same page as Yuval Harari.
Well, is he arguing against free will?
No, it's not against free will. It's basically saying there's no such thing as consciousness. It's just your mind is a very,
no.
very complex thing.
No, I think
your brain is
consciousness
is an incredibly complicated thing.
He thinks consciousness doesn't exist, though, does he?
I
Only
think that
within
was
your
one
mind.
of the views that he was giving. I don't necessarily agree with him either.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just don't know.